Have you ever thought how fragile normal days really are? How one moment you're laughing, texting, boarding your flight, and the next, everything becomes fire smoke and silence. This is a tragedy so violent, so fast, so unbelievable that the world still struggles to explain how it happened. The story of AI171, a flight that promised 8 hours of comfort and ended in just 30 seconds of terror. It was a bright, ordinary afternoon in Ahmedabad, India on June 12, 2025. The sky was clear, the airport buzzed with travelers, laughter check-in lines and boarding announcements. Families waved goodbye, lovers embraced kids, dragged stuffed animals behind them, unaware of the weight of what was coming. At 1:38 p.m. local time, Air India Flight 171 was scheduled to take off from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport to London Heathrow aboard the sleek, modern Boeing 787 Dreamliner. 241 passengers had taken their seats, buckled up, stowed their bags, and settled in for what was supposed to be a long, safe flight. The crew in the cockpit monitored the instruments closely as the plane climbed steadily into the sky. Captain Vikram Singh had flown this route dozens of times, and his co-pilot Pooja Mehta was equally experienced. Their voices were calm, their movements precise. The aircraft responded smoothly to every command. The altitude increased, the ground faded away, and the passengers began settling in. Some took off their shoes, others leaned their heads back and closed their eyes. Somewhere in row 20, a couple held hands quietly, whispering about their upcoming wedding in London. In row 11, a man named Vishwash Kumar Ramesh glanced out the window, then down at his phone, he sent a quick message to his sister just boarded. "See you soon," then put it into airplane mode. The cabin felt calm, peaceful, as if the entire world had paused just for a moment to let this journey begin smoothly. But nothing stays still for long, especially not at 30,000 feet. Only they never got anywhere near that high, because 30 seconds after liftoff came the first sign of doom. A strange shudder. Not violent, but definitely wrong. The kind of vibration that makes you stop breathing for a second, hoping it's just turbulence, but it wasn't turbulence, not this time. A sudden loud bang echoed from the left side of the plane, followed instantly by a sickening lurch. Downward passengers screamed, seatbelts snapped tight overhead, bins rattled, and from the cockpit, the pilots could already see what was happening. Engine 2 had failed, and worse control input response from the rudder and elevators was delayed and erratic. The Dreamliner, which had been lifting perfectly moments ago, now pitched forward aggressively, dragging its nose downward toward the city below. Inside the cabin, it was pure chaos. Drinks flew across aisles, trays crashed against knees. A baby cried uncontrollably, while her mother tried to shield her with her arms. One flight attendant attempted to stand, but was thrown forward into the galley by the force of the descent. Oxygen masks dropped without warning, swinging wildly, and unused people screamed. Not knowing what was happening, or why the plane was diving so fast, the ground grew closer with terrifying speed. Fields, houses, buildings, all rushing up as if pulled by a magnet of death. The pilot shouted commands, but the systems weren't listening. Not fully. Their hands fought the yoke, trying to level the descent. Trying anything, but the aircraft had become unresponsive. The angle was steep, the altitude too low, and the time too short. All they could do was brace for what came next. Less than 1 minute after takeoff, at a height of less than 800 feet, AI-171 slammed into the rooftop of a crowded student dormitory attached to a medical college 2 kilometers from the end of the runway. The sound of impact was louder than thunder, louder than bombs, the kind of sound that tears through bone and metal and concrete and lives. The explosion that followed ripped through the building with such force that the entire left side collapsed instantly, sending dust glass and flames shooting into the air in a pillar of fire and debris. The aircraft disintegrated on contact, breaking apart into hundreds of twisted pieces that scattered across the nearby buildings, streets and courtyards. Engines detached from wings. Fuselage crumpled into fragments. The black box crushed between beams and rubble. The dormitory caught fire, immediately turning what had been classrooms and study halls into an inferno. Survivors on the ground ran from the buildings. Clothes, scorched faces, bloodied, some in bare feet, others still in scrubs or lab coats covered in ash. The flames spread fast. Fuel from the wreck ignited everything it touched. Windows blew out as fireballs shot from one room to another. Several students trapped on upper floors were never seen again. The fire department was on scene within minutes, but minutes were already too late. The smell of burning jet fuel and flesh filled the air, turning the sky above Ahmedabad dark gray with smoke. Fire trucks struggled to push through streets, already choked by rubble cars and horrified civilians trying to flee or find loved ones. Ambulances lined up down the block, medical staff overwhelmed, exhausted, unable to process the sheer number of burned bodies being brought out in sheets, or not at all. The official death toll reached 270 people, 241 on board the plane and at least 29 in the dormitory and nearby area. The blast radius had been wide, the destruction total. And amid all that death, a single figure crawled away from the wreckage. Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, bloodied, burned, but breathing. He had been seated near the left exit row in 11A when the impact threw him sideways. The section of the plane he was in broke off and slid into a smaller structure beside the main dormitory. The metal shielded him from the worst of the explosion and was believed to have broken off and slid into a smaller structure beside the main dormitory, allowing him to escape through a rupture in the fuselage. Fire smoke and twisted metal, each movement burning worse than the last. He didn't know where he was or whether he would die in the next 5 seconds, but his body moved anyway, pushing him forward into the dust. He lay still when rescuers found him too injured to speak, too shocked to cry, but alive just barely. His survival was a miracle, a strange sliver of luck in a disaster without mercy. And while the world stared at the smoking crater on the edge of Ahmedabad, one question began echoing louder than the sirens, louder than the headlines, louder than even the grief. What had gone so catastrophically wrong? Within hours of the crash, the government of India launched a full-scale investigation. A task force was assembled with officials from the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, Air India representatives, airport management, and international experts, including the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and Boeing engineers. Their first priority was find the black boxes, the only two devices that could explain what happened inside that cockpit in the final moments. Despite the fire and structural damage, both the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were recovered intact by nightfall. Charred but functional, they were rushed to a secured lab in New Delhi for analysis. Meanwhile, hundreds of people gathered at the crash site searching for closure. Some sobbed quietly by the perimeter fences, clutching photos of loved ones. Others simply stared at the wreckage in numb disbelief. The area was cordoned off, guarded by military personnel, while forensic teams combed the debris inch by inch, documenting every piece of twisted metal, melted plastic, and scorched clothing. Early reports from air traffic control logs showed that Flight AI171 had made no distress call. The pilot shouted commands trying to recover control. No communication suggesting anything was wrong. Everything had appeared normal until the moment the radar signal simply vanished. That silence raised more questions than answers. Could it have been a catastrophic engine failure, a software malfunction, or even something as simple and sudden as a bird strike? Investigators refused to speculate. They knew that every theory meant nothing until the data spoke. As forensic experts continued examining the wreckage, they noticed that investigators noted unusual damage on engine components, but the cause and sequence remain under review. One engine appeared to have failed, and worse, there were signs of control instability. But what caused the failure? Was it a manufacturing defect, a maintenance oversight, or a chain reaction triggered by something else entirely? Maintenance records for the Dreamliner showed that it had undergone its scheduled inspection just 2 weeks before the crash, signed off by senior engineers in Mumbai. Nothing unusual had been reported. The crew itself was among the airline's best. Captain Singh had more than 20,000 flight hours and no disciplinary record. First Officer Mehta was regarded as a rising star within Air India, young, precise, and calm under pressure. There was no history of crew conflict, no sign of personal stress. All systems were supposed to be normal, so why did the plane fall from the sky within 30 seconds? When analysts finally decrypted the cockpit voice recording, they found the last 30 seconds of the crew's life frozen in eerie clarity. It began with a short burst of static, followed by Captain Singh announcing V1, rotate the standard phrase during liftoff. Then silence for 5 seconds, broken by Mehta's voice saying something's wrong. Then came a loud bang, the pilot's voices overlapping in rapid succession, references to Engine 2, and possible yaw, misalignment, though control response anomalies have yet to be confirmed. Preliminary analysis suggests repeated control inputs in the final moments, but full transcription of the cockpit voice recorder has not yet been publicly released, and a sharp alarm signal that indicated loss of elevator control. Then nothing. The silence was louder than any scream. On the data side, engineers mapped out altitude, airspeed, pitch roll, and engine performance second by second. What they found was chilling. The right engine lost thrust just after liftoff, followed by a brief electrical surge in the flight control system. The autopilot never engaged, and the aircraft had become unresponsive. The left engine continued running, but could not compensate for the asymmetric thrust and aerodynamic instability. The nose went down, the angle increased, and the descent became unrecoverable. Some theorized that the engine fan disc rupture caused a severed cable or disrupted hydraulic feedback, leading to an uncommanded nose down trim. Others believed a suspected fly-by-wire anomaly was considered, but no definitive evidence has confirmed software malfunction at this time. Still others whispered about the possibility of foreign object ingestion or external interference was mentioned early on, but no supporting evidence has been found. The truth, it seemed, lay somewhere between design limitation and an extraordinary sequence of bad luck. As days turned into weeks and pieces of wreckage were laid out in hangars like a morbid puzzle, the families waited. Some demanded accountability. Lawsuits were filed. Protests erupted outside Air India's headquarters. Others simply wanted to know why. Why did their son, their mother, their friend never make it past the airport? Meanwhile, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, the sole survivor, remained in intensive care. Burned over 30% of his body, suffering from multiple fractures, and emotionally shattered, he was unable to speak to investigators at first. But slowly, through short interviews and written notes, he described what he remembered: the quiet moments before takeoff, the sudden jolt, the tilt of the cabin, the screams. He had no memory of how he escaped, only the smell of smoke, the feeling of metal cutting into his hands, and the unbearable heat on his skin. His survival doctor said was not just luck, it was anatomy timing and the sheer will to live. His seat location near the exit row, the break in fuselage that created an escape route, the angle of impact that spared his section by inches, all of it aligned in a way no one could have predicted. His story, though inspiring, only deepened the mystery. How could hundreds die in seconds while one man walked away? How could a plane considered one of the safest in the world fail so catastrophically? And if it could happen here, could it happen again? These were the questions investigators faced as they pored over every rivet, every log entry, and every second of recorded data. The goal was not blame, but understanding, to ensure that whatever went wrong on Flight AI171 never happened again. But the deeper they dug, the more it felt like chasing a ghost, something invisible, silent and deadly, hiding in the wires, the steel, the code. The days that followed the crash of AI-171 were filled with sirens, smoke, and questions. But once the last flame was out and the final body recovered, something else settled over the city of Ahmedabad. Silence. A kind of silence that did not mean peace, but emptiness. The kind that lingers after screams, fade after funerals, and after news vans leave. At the site where the dormitory once stood, there was nothing but scorched concrete, blackened trees, and a chain-link fence wrapped in flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. Photographs of students who had died without warning, pinned beside images of passengers who had never even made it over the city skyline. Their faces faded slowly under the sun, but the grief remained sharp. In London, families who had waited at Heathrow with signs and open arms were now gathering in churches and temples, trying to understand how a journey of hours had become a lifetime of loss. Some watched the footage on repeat, the fireball rising above the city, the twisted wreckage, the blurred image of the only survivor being wheeled away, hoping that seeing it again might make it more real, or maybe more explainable. Others turned off every screen in the house, locked away suitcases that would never be unpacked, and sat in silence, staring at empty chairs and unread messages. For the media, the story had everything horror, mystery, heartbreak, a miracle, and questions no one could yet answer. Headlines ran photos of Vishwas Kumar Ramesh alongside timelines of the final seconds diagrams of the Dreamliner systems, and quotes from aviation analysts who could only guess. Every expert said the same thing: this shouldn't have happened, and yet it had. Conspiracy theories bloomed. Was it terrorism, a software hack, an untested patch in the autopilot code, a hidden defect in the engine part? Forums filled with theories, arguments, and outrage, while investigators quietly kept working, buried in data, away from cameras and microphones. Air India grounded all Dreamliners of the same configuration pending inspection. Boeing issued a statement of condolence promising full cooperation, while engineers began dissecting the design to look for weak points no one had ever noticed. The airline offered compensation, but no number could fix what was broken. Among the hardest hit were the students and staff of the medical college, many of whom had lost friends, mentors, or family members in a crash they never boarded. A memorial wall was built beside the new dormitory, etched with names and dates that marked lives cut short by something far beyond their control. And inside hospitals across the city, survivors of the ground explosion lived with burns that would take years to heal, both on the body and in the mind. In the air travel community, pilots began speaking in hushed tones about the AI-171 case, not because they didn't care, but because they did. Because every checklist they followed, every switch they touched, now carried the ghost of a plane that had done everything right and still gone down. In flight schools, the story became a case study, not just in what went wrong, but in how fragile the margins were between safe and doomed. Even seasoned captains found themselves checking engine gauges more often during takeoff, listening a little harder to the silence, wondering whether their aircraft could betray them too. for Vishwa's recovery was slow, painful, and filled with moments no one could understand but him. He would wake at night gasping for air, his skin burning from phantom heat, his ears echoing with screams that were no longer real but would never truly leave. He could not explain why he survived, and no one else could either. People called him lucky, but he hated that word. He did not feel lucky, not when he looked in the mirror and saw the scars, not when he remembered the faces around him that did not make it, not when he closed his eyes and saw the sky flip upside down. He gave interviews when he could, but mostly he stayed away, choosing instead to speak through silence, through hospital visits, through quiet moments where he stood at memorials alone. In his presence, people were reminded that the line between life and death is not always about strength or skill, but about inches, seconds, and randomness. His existence became a question with no answer, a symbol of survival, yes, but also of everything that could not be saved. As the investigation stretched into months, interim findings pointed toward a rare and catastrophic sequence of mechanical failures combined with system-level vulnerability. The final report was still pending, but the conclusion was already forming. AI171 had not fallen because of one mistake. It had fallen because of several small things that aligned at the worst possible time. Things that would have meant nothing on their own, but together formed a chain that could not be broken. The silence that followed was not just about grief, it was about uncertainty, because no one could promise it wouldn't happen again. Passengers continued to fly, pilots continued to work, airlines continued to operate. But in the quiet moments before liftoff, some people found themselves holding their breath just a little longer, listening for a vibration that wasn't there, praying that this flight, unlike AI171, would reach the sky and stay there. The crash of Air India Flight 171 was not just a moment in time, it was a fracture in the lives of hundreds of families, a rip in the illusion that modern aviation is untouchable, a reminder that even the safest systems can fail. And when they do, the consequences are more than mechanical. They are human. Behind every row, number, every seat assignment, every boarding pass was a person with a name, a story, and a life that deserved more than 30 seconds of terror. There were students, parents, business travelers, vacationers, newlyweds, and children who had barely begun to dream. And there was one man who walked away not untouched, not unharmed, but alive. Vishwas Kumar. Ramesh's survival did not undo the tragedy, it illuminated it because in his eyes the world saw both the horror of what was lost and the unbearable weight of what remained. The investigation will continue, findings will be released, recommendations will be made, systems will be reviewed, and safety protocols will be rewritten, but no report, no data, no update to software or checklist will bring back what was taken that day over Ahmedabad. The loss was permanent and it echoed far beyond the city or the airline. It echoed in every airport waiting lounge where someone now checks the flight number twice. It echoed in every pilot's mind when they push the throttle forward and feel the aircraft leave the ground. It echoed in the hearts of the families who now light candles where they once waited with flowers and signs. The world has always flown on trust. Trust in people and systems and physics and procedures and the idea that the sky is vast but safe. AI171 did not destroy that trust, but it cracked it. It forced everyone to look at the fine line between ascent and descent, between calm and chaos, between life and memory, and it forced an industry to ask questions it hoped it would never have to answer. The lesson of AI171 is not one of fear, but one of awareness. Awareness that perfection is a myth, that even the best pilots and the best machines cannot defy everything, that sometimes survival is not about control, but chance, and that every time we fly, we put a piece of ourselves into that silence between takeoff and landing, hoping that this time nothing breaks. For those who lost their lives, we remember you. Not as numbers, not as passengers, but as people. You were doctors and training teachers, artists, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, and friends. You were on your way to somewhere, and you deserve to arrive. And to the one who did, who carries the memories no one else can see, we offer not congratulations, but compassion. Because to survive something like this is to carry more than just a body out of fire. It is to carry the weight of questions with no answers, and the burden of knowing that your breath still comes when others were stolen. Some stories are not meant to end cleanly. They haunt, they stay, and maybe they should. Because in that haunting, we remember what matters. We remember that safety is not guaranteed, that time is not promised, and that every journey is a gift. If there is anything we take from the tragedy of AI171, it is that the sky, for all its beauty, demands humility. That we are guests in its domain, flying not by right, but by design. And when that design fails, it does not care how many miles we have flown, before how many takeoffs went smoothly, or how many voices we still have left to call home. It only asks one question: are you ready? Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for honoring the lives that were lost, not just with silence, but with understanding. Until next time, may every flight you take be one that returns you safely to the ones who wait.